Okay, lastly, last slide for Marxist criticism, I believe we have overt meaning. So you're looking for overt meaning. That just means it's obvious. You have clear discussions of money, of work, money, and class. You have characters complaining about their position in life and they're not paid as much as so and so. You have characters being oppressed and being miserable, mostly at their jobs. That's overt meaning. That's overt discussion of class. Conversely, we have covert meaning. So that's kind of hidden discussions of money or class. It's not explicit in the book. There's an example of a short story that we study sometimes called The Shining Houses, which is a short story about a group of residents in a subdivision, a kind of modern subdivision, and there's one house that has not sold its property to the developer, and it's an older lady that lives there, and her house is run down, but she has no plans to sell. And the story revolves around kind of a neighborhood meeting where they complain about her and they complain about their property values being diminished because of her unsightly house and such. And so that's a good example of covert meaning, where they're discussing class, but not really explicitly. Okay, the last subcategory we have is feminist criticism. So we'll explain feminist criticism a little bit here and then get to the look fors. And it just so happens that the story for today, the yellow wallpaper, I'm going to ask you to take a look at it through the lens of feminist criticism or applying feminist criticism to it. Okay, so obviously we're going to take a look at gender roles and how genders are portrayed and dealt with in literature with feminist criticism. Uh, First of all, though, we need to mention that feminist critics. So we're interpreting literature with all these things, but feminist critics really have a goal to change the consciousness of readers, and I suppose Marxists could be too, for that matter. But feminist critics really are oftentimes saying, look at how women are portrayed here, look how it reflects society. This needs to change. You essentially need to quote unquote wake up the readers to phallocentric assumptions and patriarchal ideologies in literature. Phallocentric meaning male centered, and patriarchal, we'll define that later, meaning kind of paternal, um, men acting as a father to everybody instead of as an equal partner. Anyway, feminist critics also argue that gender is a cultural construct, which means that gender roles are highly culturally dependent. So some cultures will have a very strongly male dominated culture, whereas others it might be slightly more equitable. Females may have roles in society in certain cultures where they would never have that role in society in others. Okay, so it depends on the culture. Uh, you know, Gender roles are highly dependent on the culture in which they are rooted in. Generally, though, we have male that means active, dominating, rational. And we have females, which generally means, sorry ladies, passive, submissive, and emotional. Okay, this is not good. Feminist criticism is almost exclusively pointing out the mistreatment of women. Again, sorry ladies. So ultimately, feminist criticism wants to challenge the literary cult of masculine virility, which reduces women to sex objects. So you have the classic damsel in distress tied to the railroad tracks, and the handsome, shining cowboy who rides in to save her at the last minute. And she could never have solved the problem on her own because she's just a little pretty girl. That sort of thing. Okay? Once again, sorry, ladies. Lastly, feminist critics want to the canon in this point here. The canon refers to the sort of exclusive group of literature that is most often studied. Those are canonical novels or canonical writers, and it's almost all white dudes. So feminist critics really want to, extend or open that canon to include people other than old white, usually dead men. Okay, so how do you do feminist criticism? There are a number of things you can look for in feminist criticism that sort of reflect the subjugation of women. The first one is a covert feminist agenda, and this is very popular in Victorian literature. And that deals with females who outwardly are happy with their role in their society, but we sort of have access to their thoughts, or we can see that they are not actually accepting and they're actually quite unhappy. Okay? So it's females who suffer when they accept their designated role in society. We have stereotypes. In female characters, we've already mentioned the virgin whore mother crone combo. Crone is another word for old woman. It's a fantastic word. Please adopt it into your own personal lexicon. But we've already discussed that in terms of medieval literature. And it was, for a long time, those were the only characters available to women. So it's gotten better recently, but it is not, it's still, female stereotypes still exist. So those can be a straight or subverted sense, just means, overt or covert, obvious or subtle. Okay, phallocentrism. I noted that we would talk about that later. Phallocentrism is just male-centered. So everything is focused on the male. You have a focus on rationality over emotion. So remember, we talked about heart and head. It's a very similar sort of situation where you have a preference for a calm, rational response, and that comes from the men, as opposed to a emotional, frantic response to things, and that would be a female response traditionally. Patriarchy is a relationship between men and women in which the women are treated like children. So it's, if you have a couple, and if you've already read The Yellow Wallpaper, this should be ringing bells for you. You have a couple, let's say a married couple, but the man in the couple treats his wife as though she is a child and not an equal, not a partner. Further, some type of imprisonment and or isolation. This can be literal or metaphorical imprisonment. Again, Yellow Wallpaper should be ringing bells right now. So there was a popular sort of trope in Victorian literature where you had women sort of locked in attics and stuff, and that would be a literal imprisonment or isolation, or it could be less literal and more metaphorical. Silencing. So taking away a woman's voice, and that could be the literal voice if a woman loses the ability to speak for some reason, but it can also just be not valuing her opinions or taking them seriously and preventing her communication that way. Repression would be, there's another reference to the Mad Woman in the Attic from Victorian literature, but repression is when you want to express things, but you can't or shouldn't, and so you bottle them up and shove them deep down inside and wait for them to come out at an inopportune time. So in the case of feminist literature, that would be repressing natural ladylike instincts and natural ladylike desires or wishes because the female character knows that she can't or isn't allowed to express those kind of things. Repression is the opposite of expression. And that's it.